Welcome back to Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom, part of the Migration Media Network. I am Brendan Davis, your host, and this week's guest is Jeff MARDER. Jeff is, simply put, a world-class talent, and I know I'm embarrassing him just by saying this because he's also a very modest and nice guy. Jeff has established himself as an A-list electronic music designer, keyboardist, and conductor for numerous Broadway shows and tours, as well as Cirque du Soleil, and he has also been featured at the Radio City Christmas show. He is the former pianist with the Harlem Spiritual Ensemble, which is a gig he got right out of NYU grad school with his master's in jazz piano performance, and he toured the world with them for 6 years. In his spare time, Jeff is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, a travel blogger, and a music tech guru. Now, Jeff is also, on top of all this other interesting stuff, a legacy Freemason. The legacy part means that he is one in a line of many people in his family from his dad back who are, which is not a requirement, but that is where our friendship began. And that is something I'm going to talk about in some detail myself publicly for the very first time ever here or anywhere. It's probably not interesting if you are wanting to know, who killed JFK or where the UFOs are hidden or anything like that, because I don't know. The conspiracy stuff is fascinating. That's what draws a lot of people into things like that fraternity. But this will be one of the most real conversations for just a few minutes, at least, that we get into it about what that actually means in practice for people. And it's something that I think has led to this being one of the very best, if I can say that myself, but to me, it's one of the very best and most candid and interesting talks I've ever had on the mic here. It's easily one of the most personal and meaningful shows that I'm likely to release too. Now, I'm going to do a full transcript for this episode as soon as possible and publish that also. That might mean a few weeks, but I will do that because I think this will work very well as an article with all the detail we get into, all the shows Jeff has worked on. It will serve as a bit of a textbook if you're curious about how the Broadway music or electronic music world works. I probably have more than a few people who have discovered the show for the first time thanks to Jeff, and so I want to thank you for being here. If you enjoy the show, please don't forget to share it, rate it, review it, and subscribe wherever you're hearing the episode. I really appreciate it. Also, I want to take just a moment and mention that I do read the feedback that I get, whether it's through social media or through email or the contact form. That all finds me somehow. And I did get a comment from a regular listener, someone who really likes the show, who expressed a little concern with our Big Fish side dish from this last week, that we were claiming that we were sort of like owning the China media space. And, I think that was a unfortunate misinterpretation of our enthusiasm for what we're doing with Migration Media. And of course, there are many people who paved the way before us. There will be others after us. There are many people right now doing some really cool shows, putting out some great content. I'm just glad to be part of this community. We have a very specific angle we want to do with Migration Media, but our enthusiasm should not be mistaken as thinking that we, invented the wheel. So just to put that out there. Also, this week's episode is brought to you by my new podcast, How China Works, which I co-host with Ying Li, and that show is also available. We are in our first week of daily shows. We're doing daily shows for 8 weeks, getting into the nitty gritty of everything you need to know to become China smart, or if you're a Chinese person and you want to go global, to understand how to intersect with the West. And we're covering every topic imaginable, from Chinese business dinner drinking to dating and history and face and guanxi. We're doing 8 weeks of Monday through Friday daily shows. We're doing that for 8 weeks through the end of this year, basically. And then in the beginning of 2019, we're shifting into a twice a week format that will be a little less structured. These are very tight info nuggets, I've been calling them, where we pack a lot of information into like 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And like, this is actually maybe the longest, I think this is the longest Big Fish I've ever released. It's probably close to about an hour 45 or even a little more as I release it. I'm, recording the intro. I have to finish putting the pieces together, but I think it will be very worth it. And How China Works, on the other hand, that much time would be about 3 weeks worth of shows. They're 10 to 15 minutes a piece. How's my math, right? I was a liberal arts major. And with How China Works, it is something that's meant to be instructive for people who just want to understand, have a different perspective on all this, conflict. And I don't get political here. My personal views are really not anything that comes into the show so much, but my basic stance is that I want everybody to figure things out. And of course, I have a lot more detailed thoughts than that because, I'm awake and I live here and I'm from there, meaning America. But bottom line is we want this show to be useful. We want How China Works to be useful for the broadest audience possible. This show right here, if you're listening to this, it's probably something that you are interested in Jeff, and he has quite a history, and his visit to China is more personal. He's here with his girlfriend Bella and to see her family. He tours and travels a lot, and he loves coming to Asia especially. So that's the angle for having him on this show. But How China Works, of course, is, all about China and the West. So I have links to everything in the show notes we talk about. We get into a lot of things. We have Jeff's music blog, his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu blog, his travel blog with Brian Lee, as well as Brian Lee's music tech blog, and lots more. Don't forget to find us on any of the podcatchers. Wherever you're listening to this now, you can subscribe, as I said earlier. But now, please enjoy the interview with Jeff Marder. Well, I am sincerely very, very happy to be sitting here with my old great friend, Jeff Marder. Jeff, how are you, man?
Doing great, Brendan. Great to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here for lots of reasons, not the least of which is that we are friends from Los Angeles since, I guess, was it 2006 I met you? When did you move to LA?
That sounds about right. Maybe beginning of 2005, actually.
Okay. So friends from LA for that long and stayed in touch all these years. And I've seen you when I visited New York, which is where you live now. We'll get into all this. For now, give us the really short version of who you are, where you're from, and what brought you to China. And then we're going to unpack all of this stuff.
Okay. I am a musician. Specifically, I do electronic music design for Broadway shows. I'm sure we'll get into that later.
Absolutely.
And I'm visiting China now on vacation with my girlfriend Bella. We're going to visit her father in his town about 3 hours outside of Xi'an. And I'm really very happy to be able to be here in Beijing, to be here and visit with you. I was in China for the very first time last summer. My father and I did this really cool Asia trip. He had never been to anywhere in Asia. I've been to Korea and Japan, and we decided that we would visit Shanghai as part of the trip. And I found myself really fascinated with China. And so it's very, very cool to be back here and to be able to see more of the country.
Well, I know you're going to have a great trip, and we've been talking as we were catching up earlier today, of course, about this. And I've just been to Xi'an once, but I spent about a week there, and I was with locals, and so I just really felt like I got to see it as you would with somebody who's from the area. It wasn't like a touristy experience. So the fact that you're getting to go there and go through there with Bella is going to be so great because you're going to be able to see it through the eyes of somebody who knows their way around and stuff. So in terms of, we have so much actually that I'm excited to talk about. I guess what I want to say at first, I'll thank you and embarrass you just a little bit up front because, people who've heard episodes of the show, I don't do this so much anymore. But there was a time where I was like, please encourage people to support the show and donate, and I'll keep private, but you have actually been a supporter of the show. You've been a great friend and fan and really enjoyed the show and have actually stepped up when I've had my fundraisers. So thank you for that. You're among the few, the proud. Got the lights on. Many thanks.
I have to tell you, I'm a big fan of the show. And I first listened because I thought, my buddy Brendan's doing a podcast. I got to check it out. And I listened. I think you're a fantastic interviewer. You always have very interesting interview subjects. We'll find out how interesting this one is later on.
I've got pretty high confidence.
I really love it. So I was very happy to step up and support because I want to see you be doing more of these.
Well, thank you. And we'll talk a little bit more offline too. I do have my new show. You are going to be running this episode. I have someone else coming up this week as we record. Someone else is this week. You're going to be up during my first full week of my new show that I'm launching, the Daily Show with Ying Lee, called How China Works, which is our daily show all about helping people become China smart. It's very. I haven't even told Jeff about this. That's great. I love your reaction because your action seems like, that seems interesting.
Yeah.
So there'll be a lot more to say, but I've actually done this very specifically because we're going to have a lot of promotion and press and try to get a lot of people, and I hopefully have a bunch of new people discovering Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom. So hi to hopefully all you new people, and hello and much love to the current people who've been with us. So with all this preamble, we first met. Let's actually, we're going to sort of go chronological order-ish, timeline-wise, with your life, but let's do that. You grew up in Pennsylvania, yes?
Yeah, I was born in Philadelphia, When I was 8 years old, we moved out to the northeast suburbs of the city in a place called Bucks County.
That's the one area that I know besides the city a little bit.
Oh, perfect.
I was there for about a week on a movie shoot years ago when I was doing tech stuff.
Gotcha.
Gorgeous country.
Yeah, it was a great place to grow up, surrounded by parks. And there was a farm right behind where I grew up until eventually the farm was purchased by a land developer, and there ended up being houses there. But I grew up at the time of BMX bikes.
Okay.
We used to ride our bikes around and build ramps, and, we had our bike gangs all around the neighborhood. And so it was a very cool place to just, be a kid. And then I went to college in New Jersey, and then later at NYU, I did my master's there. Moved to New York because that's what you did if you wanted to be a musician, either New York or LA. Mm-hmm. And I'd never been to LA at that time, so it wasn't even on the map in my mind.
Yeah, New York is like your backyard, so you knew.
Yeah, as a kid, I grew up taking trips into the city, so it was a very natural place to move. Also, at the time, I had this idea that I was going to graduate from college, and I was going to, make my millions as a jazz musician.
Yeah, were you a composition major at NYU?
I was a jazz piano performance major.
Performance, okay.
I went to NYU because that was one of the few schools in the country at the time that was offering a PhD in jazz.
Oh, and you thought you were going to go full PhD on this thing, huh?
Yeah. I was fully committed. And then I got into grad school and I thought, I'm not really too into this whole academia thing.
Yeah.
It's not really for me. So, I finished my degree, and right after, I was, I always really loved gospel music.
Okay.
And I thought, I'd really love to learn how to play that.
Interesting. And for a nice Jewish boy, that's a natural fit.
Yeah, perfect fit.
Me being from the South, I grew up with gospel too.
Oh, right. Yeah. So, I just graduated from NYU, and suddenly I realized, oh my God, I have a master's degree in jazz piano. That... I'm qualified
and I want to pay the rent. What do I do here?
I'm qualified to do nothing. And I was walking around school, and I saw these signs hanging up that the Harlem Spiritual Ensemble is looking for pianists for upcoming tours of Italy and UK and Asia. And I didn't even know what the difference was between spirituals and gospel at the time.
Right.
I just saw that. And I thought, I'll be playing gospel. I don't know. And I thought, well, I really want to get this gig. What can I do to improve my odds?
Uh-huh.
So, of course, the obvious thing was to rip all the signs down.
Wow. Okay, a little guerrilla warfare right off the bat here.
Oh, absolutely. When you're hungry enough,
Yeah.
So I did that.
And I know you're a martial arts guy. This is some deep game.
Yeah. Well,
I think Sun Tzu might have come later. Anyway, but I don't want to jump around. It's your story. Tell me your story.
So I went in for the audition and ended up getting the gig. And, like a month later, I was on the plane to, I think we were performing at the Edinburgh Festival in the UK and someplace in Sardinia. And, it was like the group was 6 singers, a percussionist, and myself. I was given a crash course in playing this. It was like we were doing spirituals, but the arrangements was very gospel-y.
Okay.
So,
hey, why don't you define that a little bit? Go ahead and geek out for a minute or two on the difference here.
Spirituals,
where the line is. I mean, I have a sense of it, but I'd like to hear you define it too, frankly. I'll learn something.
Geez, I hope I can.
No pressure.
I can do it justice. But so spirituals are, it's more of a folk music that came out of what slaves were singing at the time. And there's like this whole deep history with it that, there's a lot of symbolism, and also they were served as a means of communication. And they're using the symbolism from the New Testament and the Old Testament, actually. They'd be singing about these Bible themes.
Right.
So slave owners on the plantation, they'd be listening and think, oh, okay, everybody's cool, everybody's happy. We're singing.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, they would be using this as symbolism for what was being communicated. Like either there's going to be a meeting, or we're going to plan an escape, or we need to.
They're using it as communication.
Yeah.
Right. So it had a much deeper meaning to it.
Absolutely.
But it's wrapped in the cloak of this is our talk. We're talking to the Lord, but we're also passing messages.
Yeah. So there's some really, really deep stuff.
So it's super important historically as well. There's like a real, this is spiritually important and it's historically important to people to get this right as well. This is a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, of course, there are many more layers to it, but of course, gospel is, gets into what was being done in the churches.
Exactly.
And then, we all know that specific style of gospel as exists particularly in the AME church.
Right.
So we were using that style of music, superimposing that on the spirituals. And,
wow.
And
that would be some powerful stuff.
Oh, it was amazing. Actually, looking back at my career, performing with the Harlem Spiritual Ensemble. Oh, by the way, the other aspect of this is the leader of the group was Francois Clemens, who played the role of Officer Clemens on the Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood show.
Oh, no kidding.
Who was just featured prominently in the documentary, was called Won't You Be My Neighbor?
Yeah. I haven't seen it yet. I heard it's great. I can't wait to see it.
It's such a beautiful documentary.
Oh, my gosh.
So I got to tour with Officer Clemens for all these years.
Wow. And how long were you doing that?
I was with that group for about 6 years.
Was that a full-time gig?
It pretty much was. Wow. Yeah. We were doing, at one point we did like 70 or 80 concerts a year, and we were doing concerts with pops orchestras, touring internationally.
Yeah.
We commissioned a piece to be written for us, and looking back at my career, that was some of the most fun I've ever had.
It had to be great. And did you you realize, especially sitting here now, you won the freaking lottery.
Oh, totally.
Right out of the gate to get such a gig. You have to have the skills to do that and the passion for doing it to do it well.
Yeah.
But then landing that gig, and you're in New York, and you're the part of where there's guys like you aren't a dime a dozen, but the other ones who were there are near you, basically. So that's amazing.
Yeah. It was. It's not lost to me how fortunate I was to have the gig, and I'm still incredibly grateful that I could come out of school, have this, just looking at it financially.
Yeah.
I mean, to have this gig that
taken care of.
Nobody was getting rich off of this, but it was.
It's like a steady thing, though.
Yeah, absolutely. It was steady enough that I could take a breather, just enjoy making music for a living and be doing that right out of the gate, and still have time that I could have private piano students. I could take on other freelance projects. And so that was a wonderful thing to have. And I learned so much from that gig. I learned so much about accompanying singers, of course, about playing gospel and about spirituals. And a lot of the people in that group came from an opera background, so I learned a little bit about accompanying opera.
Okay.
I would never throw myself out there as an opera pianist.
Right.
I would never take a gig as a repetiteur. I'd be terrible at it. But I learned, and it enhanced my musicianship. It enhanced my jazz playing.
Yeah, no doubt.
It made me more thoughtful as a player, more economical in how I played. Plus, it was so much fun.
Well, and so you're saying that you're doing like about 70 gigs a year with this.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of travel and a lot of it sounds like a lot of high-end gigs. So obviously a group, and I would assume, I don't know them, but from the name instantly, I'm like, well, okay, well that would be, if it's a Harlem Spiritual Choir that's touring and traveling, they're like the best of the best. So you're playing some awesome places. How many countries, how many major cities or countries would you say you visited over that 6 years? You might have a few of the same places.
Count.
A few hundred, a couple hundred maybe.
Oh, maybe not a couple hundred, but a lot were
or like different venues and stuff.
But like we did some stuff with a couple concerts with the Hanover Radio Orchestra in Hanover, Germany. Yeah. We performed in some little town in East Germany. And we were apparently the first Western group after the wall came down to perform in this town. So they made it a big celebration.
Oh, okay.
We performed in Seoul at the big, I guess there's a big complex there, like they're a version of Lincoln Center.
Okay, wow.
Again, we were in the UK. We went back to Italy. Every year we used to spend at least several weeks in Italy.
Touring around. So
And it was, we would perform in big concert halls, sometimes in little churches.
Oh, that had to be just mind-blowing.
It was amazing.
Well, we're going to end up, let's not go there yet because I'll reference this. We'll put a pin in this as this first giant foundational experience of travel and perspective because your travels have only increased. So we'll end up at the end of this interview sort of wrapping up like meta lessons. But let's save that because I know that's scratching the surface with you. Where did you go from there?
Well, I was starting to kind of get interested in branching out and doing some other stuff. And a buddy of mine suggested I check out the Broadway scene. Mm-hmm. And I never really grew up being particularly into Broadway. But what I saw in the Broadway scene was an opportunity to be in this world where it could draw on a lot of different skills. Mm-hmm. And I started to kind of go check it out. I sat in the pit with someone that I connected with through, mutual friends who was playing in the pit at Cats at the time. It was back when the original Cats was running at the Winter Garden.
Oh, all right. So Cats was still the biggest game in town, basically.
And I sat in, I watched him play his keyboard book in the pit. Brilliant keyboardist. His name is T.O. Sterrett. And so I'll come back to him in a second.
Okay.
So I looked and I thought, wow, these musicians are great.
The best, as good as they get, basically. And
it's everybody seems really nice. It seems like a nice scene. It's a nice clean gig. Like you don't have to be packing up gear at the end of the night.
Oh, right.
All these things that seem so great about it. I thought, I really dig this. And then I also learned that, there's a whole other world of like people who do keyboard programming, which is what I've been doing for the last few years.
Right.
Plus, oftentimes keyboardists are called upon to conduct. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I've always wanted to conduct. Maybe, so suddenly it seemed really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And the collaborative part of me thought this seems like something I want to get into. So I started to pursue that. And I reached out to people. Anyway, lo and behold, about a year later, after I started to pursue this, I got a phone call from Kathy Summer, who was the associate conductor on Beauty and the Beast back when it was running at the Palace Theater before it moved to the Luntfontein. And she was looking for keyboard subs. So, of course, I went in there and I auditioned and, because she didn't know me. She just knew me as, a friend of a friend of a friend.
You hadn't built your rep. Now you have your crazy Broadway rep. And anyway, that's getting ahead of the story. But I assume you don't have to audition at this point. But
usually it's usually not an
thing. Yeah.
But
but back then,
So. Yeah. So anyway, I went in, I played my first show. Because the way it works when you're subbing on Broadway, you learn the music. And then the first time you have actually play the show or you actually play with the orchestra is during a show. And
so your audition is like a live audition.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So I went in, I guess.
So they've done their research. They know you can do it. In theory, they know you can do it in theory, and it's on you to learn the music, and then they drop your ass in there in the pit, and you got to do it.
Yeah, it's not. It's pretty organized the way it's done.
Sure.
You have an opportunity to really do a lot of research. You sit in the pit and watch the show.
You can look over somebody's shoulder.
Yeah, and usually you can get a hold of a recording of the show from the pit.
Okay.
You practice. By the time you actually go in and play, that music is so in your system.
Got it.
It's like you're dreaming of the music you've gone over.
It's not a cold read.
Oh, absolutely.
It's the opposite of that.
Yeah, because there are so many other factors. You're watching the conductor usually on a very, very small screen.
I noticed that when I sat in the pit with you.
Oh, which show was that? Priscilla?
That was
I think that was Priscilla. Priscilla, Queen of the Desert.
No, it was Wicked in L.A.
Oh, right. Oh, my gosh.
I was in the pit with you for Wicked.
Okay.
Yeah, we're getting ahead of the story. Yeah, but I was amazed. It's like you're looking at the equivalent of an iPhone size monitor with way lower resolution.
Yeah.
And you're trying to follow the cues of the conductor who you seeing them on like basically an iPhone screen.
So, and that's just one of a number of different factors that are beyond your control that really take up space in your brain.
Like that's a whole skill set of following this thing that's like a little dot on the screen.
And because of all those factors and the fact that when you first start your very first show, your mix might not be together. You're not really sure what to listen for or how to listen for it, because you might be able to hear it fine. If you're able to take a step back and you can hear this perfectly, beautifully crafted mix, but when you're actually playing, you don't know until later on that, I've got to lock in with that, xylophone lick there.
Okay.
And, just so happens on that song, I didn't have the percussion up in my mix.
All right.
So all these little stupid things that you wouldn't
you're engineering and producing it for yourself to give you have to do your own monitor mix and adjust it as you go to make sure you have what you need to play in reference with the right people at the right time. And
if it were a pop gig, you could be focusing on just, I'll just lock in and, maybe there'd be a click track or whatever, but when you have to watch the conductor, you got to play on a rig that's not your own, and it's, programmed differently than the way you might program it. There's so many different factors that you don't have control over. So basically you need to make sure that music is like second nature, so you can focus on all these other little things.
Right.
But fast forward, and the reason why I think Priscilla was sticking in my head. Why I thought maybe...
Is that what took you to L.A.? Or you
no.
tell your story. Don't let me mess you up with your chronology. So you were starting to look around Broadway. You subbed for... Was it Lion King?
Beauty and the Beast.
Beauty and the Beast, yeah.
Yeah. Keeping with chronology. Yeah, and then
we don't have to hit everything, but we were sort of at a point I don't want to...
then I had an opportunity to go on tour. And I thought, that seems kind of interesting. So I went on tour conducting... it was the Big Apple Circus stage show, and I had always wanted to get involved with Cirque du Soleil, but I thought, okay, well, I'll do this other circus, and we'll see what happens. And plus, I was music directing the tour, and I thought, okay, great, So anyway, we had a blast doing that. Ended up going right from that to the Beauty and the Beast tour.
Okay,
and that through a connection that I made when I was subbing on the Broadway production. So I was the associate conductor on the Beauty and the Beast tour. So I got to finally get up and conduct an orchestra.
Wow.
So my first time...
What was that like? First time up there?
Oh, it was terrifying. And
I can imagine.
Because, in anticipation of possibly doing this, I took some conducting lessons.
Okay. All right.
And, had a fantastic conducting teacher. And it's one thing to, do really well in your lesson, but you really just don't know how it's going to go until you're in front of an ensemble. And not coming from a theater background and suddenly finding myself in a pit in San Francisco conducting world-class musicians and this great cast. Yeah, it was kind of terrifying. And
no doubt.
It took a little while for it to really kick in, and luckily I had some people around me who were very supportive, gave me great feedback, and allowed me to grow in that role. And I thought, okay, I kind of dig this.
Yeah, I can see you being real natural at it, but I know it doesn't just happen overnight, even with all the preparation. So you got that gig, and is that what leads to Cirque? Because I know you did some time at Cirque too.
Yeah. All this time, I had been in touch with the folks in Montreal, and the right gig never really came up. Yeah. And it got to a point where I was on the road for about 3 years, and I thought, okay, it's time to settle down, and I'm looking for something else. And, anyway, I was constantly in touch with those folks in Montreal. Anyway, fast forward, a couple years or whatever, I'm on the road for 3 years, and I had an opportunity comes up to join the O Show in Las Vegas. And I thought, you know what? Okay, it's time. So we worked it all out. I was able to leave the tour. The conductor at the time, who grew to be really kind of a mentor of mine, was so incredibly supportive, and we're still good friends to this day. But yeah, I left the tour. I bought a car over the phone. All right. Literally the car dealer picked me up at the airport, drove me to the car dealership. I signed the paperwork, drove away, moved into my sublet, and got started with Cirque.
Wow.
And it was kind of crazy. Funny. And it was a blast. I mean,
Did you help open that show, or was it already going?
It was already open for a while.
Okay.
Yeah,
because I remember when it went up. I've never seen the show, but my old partner, you might have known my old business partner, Blue Nelson, my old producing partner, 10 years. But his folks lived in Vegas.
Okay,
so I spent a lot of time in Vegas. Like when we'd go, like that was kind of my family away from my family. So like holidays, Thanksgiving, things like that.
Yeah.
So I'd spend a lot of time in Vegas, but mostly hanging out with these folks. And we'd go to a show or dinner. We go to dinner all the time, show once in a while. But but I didn't go to O with the 70-year-olds.
I think, actually, O is a really great show. I think for anybody of any age. I think
awesome.
It's really
Well, I'm thinking of which is the one that's kind of the adulty show.
Is it Zumanity?
That's what I was. I was transposing the two things. I'm like the one that's kind of got all the naked stuff. And
I've gone to see that show, and I've seen some 70-year-olds there.
Okay, well, I don't want to judge, and actually, they would have been hip enough, actually, maybe. Anyway, I'm digressing on my digression.
Zumanity has some really great circus acts.
I would love to see it. I'd love to see it.
Put aside the risque nature of the show, it happens to be a great show.
Doesn't bother me. That part doesn't bother me at all. I mean, I think make it interesting,
But it's the acts happen to be very good.
Sure,
they stand on their own as circus.
Got it. So you join O. O's in progress, and what do you go as? Like, what's your role there?
The keyboardist.
Keyboardist. So you're wearing, and you're like, I've seen other Cirque shows. You're part of the show. You're like in the sucker, right?
Well, at O,
or were you in a pit?
Well, not really a pit. The band is I don't know how to describe it.
You're kind of like, aren't you like wearing like a rig and walking around, and it's wireless and.
Not on that show.
Okay.
On either side, if you're looking at the proscenium, on either side of the stage, there are these two like little
bleachers
areas,
or something.
Yeah, like these boxes where the band is split in two.
Okay.
And you're listening over a monitor system, and it's covered in plexi for
sound purposes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So it's almost like you're in a fish tank or something like that.
So you're in the fishbowl. You weren't walking around you didn't have like a wire harness playing keyboards.
No, nothing like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm afraid of heights. It wouldn't work.
Oh, all right. Sorry, acrobatic Jeff.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to see that. That would be pretty ugly.
But that's what got you. So going to O is what I knew this part of your narrative from before. I heard this when I was getting to know you, dozen years ago, but I'd forgotten the details. So O is what got you to Vegas, to the West Coast.
Yeah, and
you probably traveled. Had you hit that with like touring before?
Actually,
you'd been back and forth now a bit, probably from touring.
Yeah. I had been in Vegas. With Beauty and the Beast, actually.
That's what I was going to ask. Had that hit LA? I don't think, did that play LA?
It played LA on the tour before the one that I was on. Yeah. I think it ended up, the tour before mine, I think it had gone to Chicago and then to LA, and then it just never left LA. And it wasn't really a tour, but they called it a tour.
Okay.
It was something like that.
Kind of set up residence.
Yeah. So I was there in Vegas.
Yeah.
And I was there for a couple years. I was there long enough to know that I loved playing the show. But I really hated living in Vegas, and it was time to look for something else. And our percussionist was originally from L.A., and he was telling me about the scene. I thought, that sounds pretty interesting. And, I'd been to L.A. a few times. I always liked it.
Yeah.
And I knew that if I left the show, I was either going to move back to New York or I'd move to L.A. And I thought, well, at the time I was young enough to just give it a chance. What's the worst that could happen? So I started making networking trips out to LA. And, my buddy was recommending people to get in touch with. So I would go out and, just have meals with people.
Right.
And a good friend of mine had actually recently moved to LA. So I knew people there. And I thought, okay, I could give this a shot. I could see what happens. So I made the choice to move to LA. So it came time, they offered me my contract for the next year at Cirque. And I thought, yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't sign it. And so I said, thanks, but no thanks. And started making plans to move to LA.
And you didn't have a gig in hand. You just knew that you were going to.
At the time, no.
Right.
But then what happened was, so I sold my house in Vegas just in time. And
before the crash.
Yeah.
That's right.
Moved out to LA. And it seemed like almost right after I moved to LA, I got a call from a buddy of mine that I had been on tour with Beauty and the Beast with. And he said, hey, we're going to be out in LA. I'm going to be doing a workshop of this new show, Sister Act. And
which went on to be a monster hit for people who don't follow Broadway.
So he said, since you're there, would you be interested in being involved? And I was like, yeah.
Right.
So it was great. Like suddenly I had some sort of a gig to look forward to. So we did that, and then we opened the show at the Pasadena Playhouse.
Oh, that's a great
And then we moved to, you'll notice, the Alliance Theater in Atlanta.
Sure. Also, yeah. Atlanta people rightly very proud of the Alliance.
Oh, the Alliance is amazing.
That's one of the best cultural things in the city.
It was a great theater.
Yeah.
So anyway, had a blast doing that. One of the other keyboardists on the show in Pasadena was my good friend Roger Steinman, who has been in the LA scene for a long, long time. It turned out that he actually had one of the chairs on the upcoming production of Wicked that was coming to LA. Mm-hmm. And he asked me if I would sub for him, which of course I said yes, and had a blast subbing for him over the Pantages. Then I was asked to sub on the Keyboard 2 book, started playing rehearsals. I was asked to learn to conduct the show. As often happens on these Broadway shows, they will have 3 or 4, sometimes 5 conductors deep because people sub out.
It's a hell of a gig. And sometimes you're doing like 2 shows on the weekends, right?
Well, if you can count Fridays, could be 5 shows on the weekend.
So it's a lot of miles is what I'm saying. It's a lot of time.
Yeah.
So the conductor needs to have a deep bench to hand it off to.
Right. Because it's not just the subbing out. It's sometimes the conductor needs to be able to sit out in the house and take notes
evaluate
on the
show. Right.
Sometimes there are rehearsals going on during the show. Mm-hmm. Or in the case of, usually it's the associate conductor who is responsible for scheduling all the pianists for the rehearsals. Mm-hmm. And if you're the associate and you're there playing rehearsals all day and then doing the show at night, you're going to need a break from time to time.
Right.
So anyway.
So it's actually a very interesting mentor system of apprenticeship here.
Because once you get up to conduct the show, if you've played a bunch of rehearsals, then that
you've come up through a system sort of like that, then you're ready for the gig.
Yeah, it's a very well constructed system.
Yeah.
So I conducted my first show at Wicked, and I thought they were just in need of a backup conductor. And after the show, because it went really well. I mean, of course, they had notes for me because there are always things you can improve.
Sure.
And then I was asked if I was interested in becoming the new associate conductor, because it turned out the person who was the associate was planning on moving on.
Okay.
And they needed someone to fill the chair. So I said,
that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So you're the number 2 guy in the music department.
Right. And then so of course I took the gig, and it was a blast. It was amazing playing with these, some of the best musicians in the world are in that pit. Yeah. And those guys playing at the Pantages, these are the guys you're hearing on, every.
You brag on them a little bit.
Like to play the show and look down and have Wayne Bergeron playing lead trumpet and these guys, even though they're playing all these blockbuster film recording sessions and number 1 albums all the time, and these cats that play at the Pantages, they come in there and they give 110% every single night.
Yeah,
they sound amazing, and it was so great to be able to stand up there. Conduct these guys. And they're all such like regular down to earth guys, just hang out in between shows, watching the baseball game and, just chilling out. And so just like people you want to hang with too.
Yeah, totally. I don't want to interrupt your story that much. I'll say that what I reminded you of, which was just so fun. My memory's foggy enough. I'm not sure that I saw you. I think did you conduct and you sat me at, I think somebody else played. I don't remember if I watched you play. I think you might have conducted, but I sat beside your keyboard.
Oh,
I honestly can't remember. I think you were conducting, but basically, Jeff and I had become friends during this time. We'll come back to that part of the story kind of later. I think it would be a good structurally, but we'd become friends. And, I'm failed rock star is my first career. For people who listen to the show know that. And I don't have anywhere near the kind of, nothing remotely approaching the credentials in music that Jeff has, but it had been a big part of my life and just really like Jeff. And I thought that would be so cool. I really wanted to experience this. And so he invited me along. And I'm pretty sure that you were conducting, but I sat in the pit and I sat there at the keyboard. And part of why I can't remember that seemingly obvious detail, because it was like hours long, was my mind was blown to bits. And I'm down there and I'm surrounded, and there, it's the horns and the drummer and the guitar players over there. People are wearing headphones and monitors, but there's still acoustic sound being made. And I'm, and the dancers, the actors were above my head. I mean, it's the pit. I mean, they're literally over my head. And so I didn't see the show. I still haven't seen Wicked, except I've seen the conductor at an angle that I think was you.
Okay.
But mind blown. And just what an experience. And yeah, the level, and then actually I remember we went out for like drinks with all the folks after.
Yes, it was. I remember that. Yeah.
You did conduct, because everybody was like giving you attaboys. There was a lot of people were like complimenting you, and there was some conversation about.
Well, there were a lot of very kind people in that bit.
But there was conversation about things that happened during the show that would have been the perspective. But anyway, I hope I haven't bored people too much with my anecdote. But it was so great. But also just it impressed me so much. I mean, if you spend any time around professional musicians or professional entertainers, you understand the level of order and structure that's involved. It's not like, maybe the facade of people think that it's just a thing that magically happens and we all just kind of magically show up. I mean, it's like a military operation without the guns.
It's funny. The word military was sticking in my mind because with these shows, that's exactly how it runs. Everybody has a very specific role.
Oh my God.
And everything has to happen exactly on time and exactly a certain way. And sometimes the reason why certain people may succeed or not succeed in that role is, or in that world, has to do with how well they can
get with the program.
Exactly.
Basically.
Yeah. I've seen people who are fantastic musicians just not be able to get with the program, and unfortunately, their skills are not really of use there.
Right.
It's all about teamwork and collaboration. So if you play well with others, then it works for you.
Nice. And part of what I know, again, is if you're driving to a thing to talk about in terms of conducting, take this wherever you want to take it. But, another piece of this, you touched on this when you gave your quick intro, but music programming, because this is part of it. And the fact that, can you give the short thumbnail of how the technical part of this runs? Like, again, every episode, sometimes, depending on the episode, I mean, I'm going to tag this with, there will be the people who are really into this stuff and are just really curious to know sort of a thumbnail of how this stuff runs. So can you just kind of tell us, like, how does it work with like the, Ableton or whatever is the guts of this and how you do all that stuff?
And actually this is probably a good time to take a little detour into how I got into that.
Please. Yeah, because I'm wondering if you had a tech background, but what your tech background was, because you're like, jazz piano performance major at NYU, and I then played for a spiritual thing touring, and then I'm in Cirque du Soleil, and now I'm doing this programming gig.
I was always, with regard to music, I was really kind of a purist in terms of, for a long time, I only wanted to play piano. And I remember a buddy of mine, this is back when I was just getting started with my career. He said, at some point in your career, you'll probably be called upon to play keyboards and do something technical. It would probably behoove you to learn about that world. And I thought, this guy's right. Mm-hmm. And I went out and I bought a keyboard. I mean, I always had I had keyboards when I was a kid. Like one of the reasons why I got asked to play in bands when I was in high school was I was just the only kid that had a keyboard.
Yeah.
And
most kids might have had like a cheap guitar, like the one in this case you don't see, but that's like a $200 guitar, if that.
Yeah, I saved my allowance and I bought my first synthesizer when I was in middle school, and I used to lug that thing around, and but I gotten away from that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I started getting back into technology, and while I was with Cirque, I was starting to get more and more into technology.
I would guess that's a pretty tech heavy production because everything else is with those guys.
Most of the programming I was doing was it was more MIDI programming, and we hadn't really gotten into the whole soft synth thing yet. We started to use Giga Studio a bit on that show, and I think by now they've converted over to Ableton. but on my keyboard chair, it was like, like vintage Roland stuff and, a lot of these like the JV stuff.
And I'll put links in the show notes for people who aren't like super hardcore. I'll put in some links so you can do a little exploring if you want to know more. But if not, the people who are into this will know what we're talking about. And we'll move on to something else shortly. But please continue.
Yeah. So anyway, I was surrounded by a bunch of gearheads.
Right.
So that was really, really great for expanding my knowledge. It was not very great for my bank account.
Okay.
But I was buying new gear, new software all the time. And so I was really getting...
Make it, spend it.
Yeah. And so, but I was really getting into it. And it was a ton of fun. So I started getting back into that whole world. The guy who was doing the programming for Sister Act, when I started doing that, it turned out he was looking for someone to assist him on upcoming shows, which is how I started to get into doing the keyboard programming. And, eventually, as what happens in this whole world with whether it's in the world of sound design or whatever, eventually those assistants end up getting called to do their own gigs, which is
right. People move up or move on. Yeah.
So that's how I got into that world, which is basically this. In the world of Broadway and to a lesser extent pop music, but mainly in Broadway, whenever there are keyboards being played in the pit, really any kind of electronic music instruments that involve synthesis, there's this person called the synthesizer programmer, keyboard programmer, electronic music designer, whatever you want to call them, who designs the system, programs all the sounds and sets it up, teaches the players how to use it, and maintains it. And I found that really interesting because it was a really great way to segue back into the Broadway world, and be able to use this newfound technology-related knowledge.
And this isn't, let me interject really fast, as I understand it, this isn't just the sounds like on the keyboard. This is also like the track, like all the musicians have a tempo. The drummer has a reference in their brain. Is that all coming from you, basically? Is that all living from that system?
It depends how the show is designed.
This is kind of like a master control play. It could be like a master control.
It could be. Like I just set up a show recently. Actually, I can give a little plug for this too.
Okay.
We did a remount of the national tour Finding Neverland. And this particular show, it's actually all the keyboards are being, they're all, the keyboards that are played are Chord Kronos keyboards. And for this show, that keyboard is absolutely perfect. It sounds freaking amazing. And my role on the show is doing the Ableton programming. And on this version of the tour, I did this with a co-programmer. It was me and Enrico Detrizio, who is also he's the Ableton programmer for the show Dear Evan Hansen. I think he's done some work on Hamilton, and he's a brilliant Ableton programmer. So the two of us set up that show, and I think I could safely say now, very, very soon on the Apple Newsroom website, they're going to be doing a little feature on the way that we use the Mac Minis.
Oh, awesome.
The show. Cool. So Enrico flew out to, I think somewhere in Michigan, and I think it was Grand Rapids, and Apple sent a team from Cupertino. They took some photos, and they did a little piece on us. So that should be up probably by the end of the month, I'm told.
Awesome. So are you're in that as well?
I'm supposed to be. We'll see what happens.
Nice. All right. Well, yeah. I love a little cross promotion with Apple.
Sure.
So I'll send this to the Pro Sound people anyway. Please. So Ableton, like people like DJs use Ableton as well.
Yeah.
It's people who do electronic music or, like you said, a lot of pop. If there's a lot of stuff to coordinate, right?
Yeah.
It's a way that you can also coordinate a lot of people, and it's not just for you can play an instrument through this stuff, but it's also a way to coordinate a lot of things.
Yeah, the thing about Ableton, it's become very popular in theater because, I mean, there are other programs that will do similar things. Like, for example, if you need to send time code, well, you can do that from many different programs, and you could use QLab for that. But Ableton gives you a lot of flexibility in that you take all of they're called clips in Ableton, but, or regions and Logic, whatever, and set them up in a modular fashion. So if you need to reorder things or restructure things, you can do it. And so you have a lot of flexibility, which you really need when you're setting up on these productions because things are changing constantly.
Okay.
So it gives you the option to do that. So what will happen is we'll have a click track that will sync, it'll keep the whole band together.
Right.
And then whatever backing tracks we've got. And then usually you send time code, and that might go to any one of a number of different departments. So, for example, in Finding Neverland, I think I could say this without, revealing what's
not like trade secret. Yeah. But like this changes the sounds. Like you don't have to like find your right patch at the right moment. Like you're playing the music, and magically does the right sound come up at the right time?
Well, you can do that. There are other shows that are doing that. Happens a lot in the pop world.
Okay. Well, please continue your story. I just want to see if I understood.
But like the time code will be, let's say if you have video projections that need to sync exactly with the music, that would be a perfect opportunity. So you'll be sending them time code, and then they program projections, lighting, or the automation, whatever it is.
So everything is synced.
So it happens to the frame.
Right.
And then the click track ensures that the music stays with that.
Got it. So people are using that for able. And so you really, anyone who, even if this isn't your jam, you can tell that it is Jeff's jam. He knows this quite deeply. So you developed these skills. You apprenticed with the man you just mentioned earlier.
Enrico and I worked together on a couple of other projects, but I apprenticed with someone else, and then I started to get calls to do programming for shows independent of that person, and then the rest is history.
And this brings you, that's pre-Wicked.
So I was living in LA doing Wicked, started getting
called. And Wicked ran a long time in LA, as I remember, several years, right?
Yeah, I think it was probably the last pretty long-running show that they've had there.
It seemed like it just was a permanent thing, because the banners were up forever in Hollywood. Yeah. And it was continued to, the business better than me, of course, but it seemed like it continued to sell well.
Oh yeah, it was selling great.
It seemed like they took it, like they clawed it out of there to put something else in that was also.
Well, they had a definitive closing date lined up. And so I was looking, and I saw that, the show's going to be closing on such and such a date.
Okay.
I had been traveling back to New York for these programming gigs. And while I was in New York, we were doing orchestra rehearsals for the upcoming Broadway production of Shrek.
Because you were doing these programming gigs while you still had your LA gig. You would come back to New York, and you would help set up a show, or you would do some Jeff magic on some production, but you didn't live with it. You would go back
exactly.
And forth.
Yeah. And I found that I really loved the work, but I also was sensing that here I was in LA. I hadn't really broken into the film scene or the studio scene. I was doing theater. And I saw that Wicked was going to be coming to an end. And I thought, all right, I got to figure out what I'm going to do here.
Yeah.
And I realized the sensible thing is, as much as I loved LA, I also loved New York, and there was more work for my skill set in New York. So I started planning to move back to New York. And I reached out. I was going to start subbing on Wicked in New York. I was going to start subbing on Shrek, which I eventually did. But what ended up happening was I was back in New York. I'm on these gigs. We're about a month or two away from closing Wicked in LA. And the contractor, which is the guy who or girl who hires all the musicians and does all the coordinating of schedules and so on, and payroll, turned to me and said, "How are your jazz piano chops?" And I said, "No, I feel pretty comfortable with it, know." And, I said, "Well, are you interested in interviewing for the associate position on the Guys and Dolls revival?" I was like, yeah. So while I was there in New York setting up Shrek, I went and I auditioned, got the gig, and I had just enough time after I got back to LA to train the person who was going to replace me at Wicked. Luckily, the lease on my apartment was coming up, so I didn't renew the lease. Sold my car and set up the move. And
I remember all that sort of happening, like sort of dovetailing nicely. It seems as if preordained, which seems to be a theme. I guess career, so. By the way, which it's for you to say, maybe not for me, but I've noticed this from knowing you.
Oh wow! I'll have to think about
things.
that.
Things seem to dovetail in interesting ways for you.
And I had about a week to pack everything up and get out of there and come back to New York in time for cast rehearsals for Guys and Dolls. And we opened up at the Nederlander Theater. Didn't run very long. But it was long enough that, by the time you start the cast rehearsals and you go into tech and you have previews and the actual run.
Yeah.
You know, it was like 6 months of work.
Right.
So it was enough to kind of get up and running.
Yeah.
And then from there, after that closed, I started going and, subbing on some other shows. And then I realized, oh, I need a gig. And here's another recurring theme. And then what they started doing is for certain positions on the Radio City Christmas show, you have to audition to get into the orchestra for that. So I just had it in my mind that I was going to audition for the Christmas show and that I was going to get the gig. And I practiced like a madman.
Yeah.
And I did everything I possibly could do so that I could go in there, that audition, and just nail it. And luckily, I guess I did, or someone thought I did, because I got the gig.
Yeah.
And that was a huge, huge relief.
Sure.
And then, kind of went from there. And at least I knew, okay, I can breathe until the end of the year. I'll
Right.
be okay.
Right.
And, so I kind of had a sense that I was in the right place. And it was, by the way, that gig was just such a blast.
It had to be amazing. It had to be
wonderful. First of all,
that's like an institution.
Yeah. I mean, to be there playing for the Radio City Christmas show, it was,
yeah. What was that like? I mean, again, this is one of those instances where it's like, too bad we don't have video, because your face is just like, a kid on his birthday winning the lottery. I don't even know the right metaphor. It's just mind blowing still to think about.
Well, it's a great orchestra, and look, New York at Christmas time.
Yeah, it's pretty special. I've been there once at Christmas time. Yeah, I'll give you a tissue. There you go. No. Yeah. I know your eyes just watering, but yeah.
It's just like a really magical time, and with Radio City being such a New York institution. Absolutely. Plus, also the people in the band there are just such nice people. And actually, a little side story. A good friend of mine that I met through doing that gig, I was looking at the list of other musicians in the orchestra.
Right.
And so my last name, Marder, not a very common name.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking, and there's this violinist who's listed. His name is Sam Marder. And I thought, I wonder if we're related. And it turns out he saw my name.
Probably
so the two of us had been seeking each other out. And we just clicked instantly. And Sam is a fascinating guy. He's been in the business for many, many years. He's a Holocaust survivor.
Wow.
And he now travels around giving lectures about his experience. He writes short stories. He writes Yiddish poetry and Yiddish stories.
Kidding.
And his wife, Sonia Marder, is she's now retired, but she's a brilliant classical pianist. I mean, I was listening to her album. She just plays so beautifully. Also happens to have been Regina Spektor's piano teacher.
What?
And I mean, really fascinating people. And here's the other thing: with Sam and Sonia, when they're together, it's oh my god, it's so sweet.
Like so sweet.
Yeah, I mean, they seem like they're newlyweds.
Oh man,
and the way that the love that you feel between them, it's really so. They're just absolutely lovely people, just wonderful human beings. So that was one of the highlights of.
Like the personal aspect of getting to see them and know them and spend the time.
Yeah, I mean, if that was one of the most wonderful things to come out of that gig, to meet Sam, such a lovely human being and such an inspiring person, and to really a privilege to get to know him, to be able to sit there in between shows and chat with him every day, and so it was very, very cool.
That's amazing, man. So, when's the last time you talked to the other Mr. Marder, Sam Marder?
Unfortunately, it's been too long, and this interview is reminding me I need to give him a call.
Well, maybe give him a call, and if he listens to podcasts, hi there, Sam.
Absolutely.
Sorry I haven't met you, but I'm glad to hear a little bit of your story. That's really you and your wife. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's time to reach out to Sam again. I miss him.
Use this as an excuse to say hi to Sam.
Absolutely.
So let's continue with your career stuff, because this is really interesting. I'm so glad that you were open to, for people, again, people don't know you yet. People don't know you who are listening to this. I think of you as someone who's as accomplished as you are, and is also one of the kindest and most humble people. So Jeff doesn't you don't wear any of this on your sleeve. And so I felt like, I wonder if I had to twist your arm to kind of tell me some of the stories. I'm really glad that you're open to sharing this stuff. And the reality is, as we kind of talked off mic before this is great to be able to put this out there for people who are curious, people who are curious to follow in a similar career path or curious to know about it. So I'm glad we can get a little bit into the weeds, because I think people who, just general audiences, I think will be interested in this too. But career-wise, you've done so much stuff that you're actually sort of hitting the highlights. What else, career-wise, would you like to chat about?
Well, right after Radio City, I got a call from my friend Jeff Kleitz, who was the music director on Guys and Dolls. And he said, yeah, I got this other thing coming up here. If I'd like you to consider being the associate conductor. And this other thing happened to be the Broadway production of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. And, I auditioned for it, and because it's fairly common to have some sort of we call it an audition. Maybe it's more of an interview for these positions, just to make sure there's a good chemistry.
Right. Because this is a very you have to be able to do the gig, but part of doing the gig is the interpersonal aspect of this. You need to know that you want to be in the trenches with these folks. Yeah. So they didn't know that from you. Right. And they know you can play. They know you can play and do the things that you're doing if you show up. So anyway, to make a long story short, worked out, ended up doing the gig with Jeff. And, we grew to be, good friends, and he's an incredibly talented, pianist, conductor, orchestrator, producer. He's got a great sense of humor, and we had such a blast doing that show. We laugh constantly every time we're together. And one of the highlights of doing that show for me was that, as part of the gig, when you have a chair on a Broadway show, you have to put together a list of potential subs. Right. So one of the people I brought in to sub for me was my friend T.O. Sterrett. Ah, I know that name from earlier. Yeah, who I watched play his keyboard book at Cats. Wow. And, full circle. Yeah, and it was so great to bring T.O. in to play. First of all, he's just a lovely human being, and just a really nice person, and a phenomenally talented keyboardist. And I wish he were available more, that I could have brought him in more, but being as great as he is, he's very, very busy. But I'm so grateful that I was able to bring him in and have this come full circle. And it was so special for me. And, and when we subsequently played together in a few other pits, and, I don't know if I was ever able to communicate how special of an experience that was for me, because it was because he made room for me sitting in the pit at Cats, that I realized this was a path that I wanted to take. Exactly. This set you off on this insane journey. Yeah. Yeah. And so from there, I was starting to do more of this programming work, and I found that I really enjoyed it. That's got to be I know that's a very specific niche, because it's a really peculiar skill set to be able to do all this stuff. Yeah. And it's so specific and so niche-y that oftentimes other people in the theater don't even know what it is. Right. Well, that's part of why we're explaining it a little bit for the general audience, so that people can feel like they understand it, And that's one of the things I love about it, because it feels like you're practicing some sort of a dark art or something like that. Well, I think you are, but that's another story. But the business model of it, and what it means for your lifestyle, and also the way you interact with everybody, I found it really spoke to me. Because, honestly, look, I love conducting, I love playing, but in a city like New York, you know what? There are a ton of people who are really, really great at it. Yeah, sure. And I feel very confident about my playing and conducting skills, but I also knew that I wasn't on a music director track. Usually those people are people who are really skilled at, coaching vocals, and they know about a lot of other aspects of the business. It's probably even a little bit of a different personality type of what they want to do with their day, basically. The kinds of interactions they want to have, what's expected in terms of, And it's a different role. That was never really my track, as much as I love conducting and playing. And I just really dig this technology. I love when you plug it all in and you're like, wow, it works. And
sounds good. It's pretty cool. Or when you have a problem you have to solve that you think is impossible, and then you come up with a solution. And that part is really cool. And even more cool is you can interact and collaborate with many, many more people.
Right.
And it's, you're constantly using your creativity in every step of the process. Plus, it appeals to my nerdy numbers side. I like playing with the software. I like playing with the budgets and making that all work. And I love the model of when you're setting up these shows, maybe you'll fly out of town, you'll set up the show in whatever city you're doing the out of town in, and then you come back and you let the show run. And, you have to be available to maintain it. So sometimes I'll log on with remote desktop and I'll address a software issue. Or I just had an issue with a show in London where, I had a guy on the ground who would go in and take a look and run some diagnostics on one of the computers, and we can deal with that remotely. So you deal with these things. And like, for example, being here in China, I have someone who was on call for me for my shows back in New York. So if something goes wrong, they
can physically go to the theater.
Right.
And you can be here on a computer or the phone and go.
Yeah, or I don't even have to do that unless they like. I have my guy. He's in my favorites list on my iPhone. So if he calls me in the middle of the night, he's going to reach me.
Yeah.
But if anything goes wrong on any shows, they're going to call him, and he can go to the theater and he can maintain it. But I like that constantly going back and forth between working in a very solitary situation versus being in the theater and being in a very collaborative situation. And it's always changing. And then you have these periods of incredibly intense work where you're working 16 hours a day. And then other times where, you're sitting on the sofa in your underwear eating potato chips, watching reruns of Cops.
Sounds like a pretty interesting. So skill set wise, Let's help the kids out. Let's help out the future Jeffs. What sorts of things, if someone wanted to track in that specific sort of niche you're doing, and I know it's changing a lot. We're talking about all this exciting stuff earlier off mic, but what sort of things would you say to people that are helpful? Whether it's like just playing in a band like this, playing in that kind of a group, or doing one of these more specific jobs.
Are you speaking specifically about the electronic music design, or
I think whatever advice you would want to give. I mean, you're suited to talk about a few things here.
I think first off, you just got to be a nice person, and you've got to have empathy, and you've got to just be able to collaborate with people. It's also very helpful to be able to take criticism and understand that it's not personal, and just be able to always try to be improving upon whatever it is that you're doing. Being flexible. I mean, this is really standard stuff.
Sure.
Actually. And a big thing is just attention to detail. And a lot of the other stuff can be learned. If you need to learn a new piece of software, you can study it. You can figure it out.
Right.
But the attention to detail is a huge thing, whether you're a player or a programmer, and little things like, where does that cue come in? And, where does my volume pedal have to be in this section? Do I need to use a very hard touch or a light touch? And who do I lock in with? And all those little things.
Right.
And having enough discipline to be able to take those skills and just really lock it in to make sure that whatever you're doing in that moment is a part of your body, so you don't have to think about it when you go and you play the show. Or if you're programming, the kind of attention.
Yeah, what kind of skill set do you need for that? I mean, you've covered so many things; it's kind of hard to even keep track of it. But it's pretty interesting.
So, on a more specific level, I think it's very helpful to have played shows and to understand how the equipment is used in the show and what the players are looking for. Understanding that programming a Broadway show is different than programming for a pop gig. There are different ways you're going to set it up. One thing is that you have to keep in mind that for a Broadway show, this department is probably the only department where the gear gets set up and it gets operated by someone who may or may not know how to operate it. So sometimes they might be operating just from a quick start guide that you put together with bullet points.
Okay.
And it might be primarily a pianist who's operating a very sophisticated rig.
Yeah.
And you've got to set it up in a way that you could teach anybody how to use it.
Right. Press this button at that point and do this thing and then play the piece.
Yeah.
Then play the part. Yeah.
So you have to set it up in a way that's as foolproof as it can possibly be.
Yeah.
Because anything that you can think of or maybe not think of that might be done, they're going to do it. And so you just never really know. So you've got to plan it that way. And keep in mind that whoever's playing the book, they're going to be thinking about a lot of other different things because they're going to be thinking about things like, oh, I've got to watch the conductor here and I've got to make this particular melody in the right hand stand out and hold back on this melody in the left hand. And I got to incorporate that note that I got from the conductor last week.
Right.
And lock in with drummer there, but lock in with the violins there. And plus, it's sometimes difficult to hear in the pits, and you have to just do the best you can with what you got. So they're thinking about a lot of different things. So you just want to make their lives as easy as possible. And so that's the tricky thing. And you got to create a system, build a system that is as rock solid as possible, so that it's going to work sometimes it's got to work night after night, and don't have to worry about it. Whereas let's say if I'm building a rig for myself, you don't have to be so picky. I know that if something's not working right, I can diagnose it in 10 seconds. It's fine. It's not a big deal. But that little thing that I can diagnose in 10 seconds, this can be a major thing for somebody else.
It's not their good. Well, and so in the interest of sharing knowledge, you actually, when we get a plug in for your site, with your friend. Right.
Oh, the travel website.
Which is sharing information about travel. But this is a friend from that world. Am I mistaken?
Yeah.
Right? So, I'm connecting the dots because this is a friend from the music world that you're also avid travelers. So we're going to we're shifting gears a little bit.
Okay.
There.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, just like you have to be prepared to do when you're traveling.
There you go.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Yeah.
So in my work, this was a number of years ago, It's very difficult to find people to collaborate with in this world because you have to find the people with the right skill set, the right experience, and the right amount of attention to detail. So a college student had reached out to me totally unsolicited, just because he saw me as someone who had been in the business for a while and wanted to get advice for breaking into this aspect of the business.
Right.
So this fellow, his name is Brian Lee, and he now has a website which is dedicated to music technology. It's called, you'll like this, 441k.com.
Exactly. And that's what I was conglomerating his site plus your venture together. So to say in terms of like advice, because his site is dedicated toward helping share information specific to that world.
Yeah.
And then you have your travel site together.
Right. And I started to hire Brian as my assistant, and he would take the megabus down from Boston, where he was in college, to cover recording sessions for me and other things. And it became clear to me that this guy is a formidable force. And eventually I couldn't hire him anymore. I couldn't bring him on board to work with me unless we were going to partner. And we partnered on a few different shows because his skill set just kept growing and growing and growing. And, so we both have a love of travel, and we were both taking gigs that required us to travel all around the world. And he was, I think he was working on La Rev in Vegas at the time when we decided to start a travel website. So it's called ikimashotravel.com. Ikimasho, IKIMASHOU travel.com.
And I'll put the link in the show notes for those of us who can't keep that in our head.
So ikimasho is Japanese for let's go. And this website specifically focuses on East Asia travel because we both have done a lot of traveling in this part of the world, love traveling here. Brian is originally from Hong Kong, but he grew up around Boston. He moved to Boston with his family when he was about 6 or 7. Right now, he's living in Tokyo. And anyway, we started collaborating on this website. Mm-hmm. Brian's main thing is he's a brilliant photographer, and he takes tons of beautiful photos, just capturing street life in Tokyo. A lot of photos from Seoul and, wherever else he ends up traveling. The pieces I write tend to be the more, I'm really into points and miles. It's kind of a little side thing for me. So I wrote it was like a 5-part piece on how to use the American Express membership rewards program, which I've used quite successfully for a number of
I understood
trips.
that you flew here on the nice reclining seats, and I imagine you didn't pay retail for that. So.
Exactly. No, I never pay retail. I am all about this. I mean, I've been doing this since I was, I think in my late 20s, early 30s, saving up my frequent flyer miles. Wow. I remember in those days, you had to call the airline to book your frequent flyer tickets.
Okay.
I remember calling them up. This is while I was on tour with Beauty and the Beast, and I had a vacation coming up. Called the airlines, and I said, look, I'm trying to go to someplace in Eastern Europe, and I want to go business class. And I know I have enough miles for that. Where can I go? And they're like, well, you have to name a city first. Yeah. So I started naming cities, and they're like, nope, can't do that. That's not available. I said, what about Moscow? And they're like, yeah, that works. Do you want to come back from St. Petersburg? I said, yeah, that sounds good. Let's do that. So booked myself a trip to Russia in business class.
So they helped you route it to be able to make it work in terms of what you had available for miles and time and your needs.
Yeah. And so that's when I found my calling, travel-wise. And I've been doing that ever since, and constantly, booking upgraded tickets or booking business class tickets, because, we all know the best use of frequent flyer miles where you get the most bang for your buck is long haul business class.
Right.
So that trip to Asia that I took with my father, I told him which credit card to get, and we figured out the mileage programs, figured out our itinerary, and I opened up 2 web browsers. Yeah. And I logged into his Aeroplan account and my Aeroplan account. And I booked us both on the same itinerary on Eva Air, business class, New York to Tokyo, Tokyo to Shanghai, Shanghai back to New York. And it was so cool because he had never flown in the front of the plane before.
Nice.
So it was so cool.
I haven't internationally either. I'm back there in steerage, and it's not fun.
Well, I got to tell you, the best way to do it is to not have to pay for it.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And it was great. We actually on that trip, we actually did have to buy some miles. You can purchase miles through Amex, and we didn't have to buy that much. And with the extra miles that we bought, the whole thing ended up costing us the same as if we had just simply bought 2 economy seats.
Wow. That's pretty great for international.
Yeah.
So this site of yours is to help people it's a place for his photography and adventures and your blogs and tips and tricks about how to maximize your points and your miles and stretch it.
Right. Now we're still in the process of just getting material up there. Mm-hmm. It's a passion project, and if it can grow into something, great, but we're going to let it grow organically. And it's just something we both love. And, Brian is also into all this stuff, and he was setting up a production show, actually doing Ableton programming for one of these big Cirque-style production shows at a resort in, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Sichuanbana.
Okay.
And he was traveling back and forth from, was it from Vegas or might have been from Boston, wherever he was living at the time, to there. And so he accrued a ton of miles and some sort of super secret status on American. Yeah. And, here's this kid in his early 20s and getting upgraded to business class constantly on these American flights to, fly to Asia. So we're constantly just sharing tips and tricks and talking really super nerdy frequent flyer stuff.
Nice. So I want to pivot back for one moment to the advice about people trying to follow a similar career path, which is got to be a challenge. But I mean, it's still a mentorship system, I'm assuming, right? Like an apprenticeship type of a situation.
For people starting out in this career, I couldn't really say. I don't know.
Okay.
But I don't know what it's like nowadays. But one thing that hasn't changed is that it's all about relationships. And you got to get out there and just meet people and form good relationships with people and good, sincere relationships.
Right.
So part of it is doing the hang, figuring out who you click with. And especially on Broadway, if you look at all the different musical teams, you'll see that they're generally teams of people who they like to hang out together. They enjoy spending time together because you're spending like tons and tons of time in a dark theater,
Right.
sometimes under very stressful conditions. So you need to be able to be with people that you enjoy being around. And also that, because you need to be able to speak kind of a shorthand language together. Right. I'm sure it's the same in film.
Well, I was going to say it's very much like film and television, and especially it exists like this in TV, but a lot of TV is kind of stage or studio based. So you often sleep in your own bed at night, like the majority of the crew is local typically on a TV show. Whereas in film, it can be a location shoot where everybody's away from home. And so you do form kind of like this hardy band of pirates, or a military squad who's gone to execute some crack operation somewhere. And you do have this intense bonding, and the camaraderie and trust that you build in the best of circumstances I think is very similar. And you mentioned we are going to come back for people who are wondering. Again, some shows have a very little China focus. Actually, that's just the common connection that gets somebody in the room. But we will wrap up talking about China in a bit. But you mentioned the importance of relationships, which of course is a huge factor in Chinese society. But before we get there, I want to get into how we met for a few minutes, because I have had a small but interested minority of people be curious about my fraternity that I'm a member of, and that's actually how Jeff and I met. So we're both stonecutters, members of the stonecutters, right?
That's great episode, by the way.
Great episode of The Simpsons. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Google, depending on your country, search The Simpsons and Stonecutters. And that is their comedic riff on Homer joining an organization, which is better known by its name of
the Freemasons.
Yes, we are speaking of the dark arts. And I'm kidding. People would be very irritated that I make fun of it that way. But we met in Santa Monica at my home lodge, and that's where you found a home when you were living in L.A.
I still consider Santa Monica Palisades my home lodge. And even though I was raised in Philadelphia, my father and my grandfather and several uncles, all part of the fraternity. And my father is actually a past master.
That's what I thought, actually. I was going to ask you.
Yeah, my father, in fact, he was the one who brought me into the lodge. I remember him handing me a petition when I think I just turned 21. And I said, I'm not really so into it. I was in a fraternity in college.
Like a social fraternity?
Yeah. I was like, I'm already in a fraternity. I don't, and then later on, a few years later, I became more interested in Freemasonry. And that's when I approached my father. I said, I think I'm ready. I'd like to do this.
And that's the right way to do it, I think, is, it comes up sometimes if this topic comes up, which is, no one ever asked me. Well, technically, you're not supposed to be asked. In the case of a family situation, it's not uncommon. Yeah. But in terms of like two guys who were friends or work together, you're not supposed to ask other people. It's something that someone has to be interested in and seeks out and asks, well, how do I do it? And what do I do? And so, to put you on the spot a little bit, what do you tell people Freemasonry is if it comes up?
I think the simplest explanation is to say it's a fraternity, but it's there's a philosophy surrounding it. We demonstrate the philosophy through symbolism, and there's a pretty deep history to it, and how much of the history is actually just symbolism, we'll probably never really know.
That's an ongoing debate and topic of conversation.
Yeah, I don't think it's really important.
Right.
Because all I know is that when I walk out of a meeting, I feel that I've grown. I feel like I've become closer to the people I've been in the meeting with. And I also feel that I walk out of that meeting being a better man and a better human being.
And that's what I kind of want to underline, because occasionally someone will try to want to make it more salacious or something than it, than of course it is. And for me, growing up, we didn't talk about family. Do you have brothers or sisters? I'm not even positive if I know this.
Biological, no. After I was already an adult, my mother remarried.
Okay, so
I have a stepbrother and a stepsister, but we didn't grow up together.
Got it, right. So raised like me, raised an only child, but in this case, you grew up, and I don't have a direct connection to the fraternity that's immediate. There's some people in the extended family back in the day, but for me, I'm curious for you, but I'll leave you on a limb here. For me, I was drawn to it for lots of reasons, having grown up reading a lot of the things I read, and some of it was like the conspiracy stuff. But I had interest besides that.
That's all pretty fascinating.
It is pretty fascinating stuff. Honestly, I don't fault anybody who's into it, who gets interested by that basis. Yeah. But the reality is probably less exciting and also more fulfilling and exciting if you're into it. But for me, I found that it provided a lot of male role models. It provided a connection to other guys because I didn't have brothers, and, my parents were divorced and I was back and forth, and, not to be maudlin or anything, but it was not, my dad listens to the show, so hi, if you're listening, but we weren't super close for a majority of my growing up, just kind of toward the end was where we really knew each other a lot. So, it really fulfilled a role. And so, the part that I found so special and continue to find that way, although it's not, it's no bueno in mainland China. So I'm not active with anything here. There are lodges in Hong Kong, for instance. And probably Taiwan. I'm not sure, but Hong Kong does have a lodge or two.
There's with the transition, is that going to be changing at all?
That's a good question. Probably at the end of the 20-year period. Possibly so, actually. I don't know, but I can't tell you what's going to happen in China in 2 weeks, much less 19 years. So to be continued on that.
Yeah.
Good, very good question, actually. But what I was going to say is, for me, the basic idea is that it brings in, and it's, traditional masonry is male only, and the idea is to take gender politics and dynamics out. Yeah. So there are female-only organizations that are of their own. There are things that are adjunct. There are co-ed organizations. This is just the one that happens to be men-only. I'm also a member of the Eastern Star, which is a co-ed Masonic organization with men and women, with each share, and the woman is in charge in those meetings. So don't get all don't write me letters about this is sexist. But the point is that it's a place for men to be with other men, and part of what's so special to me is this precept that Masonry regards no man for his wealth or material position. Also, we don't discuss politics or religion in a lodge meeting. Now, very enthusiastic discussions outside, and you can talk about things at dinner, but the idea is that it's a place where people from all walks of life can be in the same place. And you don't, there might be, this guy's a CEO and that guy's a janitor or an elementary school teacher, or this guy's a lawyer, that guy's a struggling actor, this guy's a star. Yeah. But they're all like on the level with each other. They're all fraternity brothers, and they're all consider each other equal, and they just get to know each other as people. So that's been a remarkably humbling and satisfying experience, and getting to know people I wouldn't meet, otherwise in life, just people you wouldn't cross paths with. And have you had those moments, I've had a lot of basically eureka moments of insight into just the nature of how to be a man and to be in the world. Have you had your similar experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the really strong argument in favor of it being a male only organization. And I think there are ways that we as men, we relate to the world and to each other, and, in a way that's unique to us. And I think that it's important to have those role models in that situation. And I think if it weren't male only, we wouldn't be able to get that benefit from that.
I agree. And just to be clear also, there's no test for this, but we have fraternity brothers who are gay, or, it'll be an interesting thing actually to wonder if the transgender progressive issues end up affecting Masonry. That's a topic for another podcast.
Yeah.
But the point is that it's not, I mean, so it really is as inclusive as it can be. And the female organization is likewise as inclusive. And the co-ed organization is as inclusive. But I'm not trying to do an ad for it because actually, if anything, you're not supposed to. I'm not trying to, promote, but I wanted to bring it up because that is how we form this connection. And so we got to meet without, level, whatever your station in life, you're able just to get to know people as people for who they are. And that's really sincere and profound. And interestingly, I feel like, and I've done some travel before, but I feel like in a weird way, because it's not allowed here, I feel like Masonry prepared me better than anything else in my life for moving and living in China because of the need to be respectful and open to other cultures, new experiences, to not have myself elevated in a certain way. Because, you run into all kinds of folks, of course, here and in your travels. And you run into people who are, humble and eager learners and modest. And you run into people who are, the phrase ugly American comes from someplace. Yeah. Because unfortunately it is a cliche. And there's ugly Swedes and there's ugly, fill in the blank, and there's ugly, Chinese. I mean, there are people who don't travel well. But unfortunately, we have a bit of a reputation to live down. So I'm curious for you to connect the dots. Your travels in Masonry, is that related to your travels in the world in any kind of interesting ways for you? Have you done any Masonic travel?
Actually, yeah. As you were talking, you reminded me about the first thing I started doing after I was raised was visiting other lodges when I could. One of the more interesting experiences I had was actually on another trip with my father. Okay. We went to Israel, and we went to Israel and Jordan last spring, and we decided to visit a Masonic lodge. And wow, it was in Israel, in the suburb of Tel Aviv, and the meeting took place in a bomb shelter.
I remember you posted about this online. Yeah, and
it was a very interesting experience.
Is that where they have their regular meetings? That's their lodge?
Yeah, because I guess...
Is that a safety issue, or that happens to be where they have their lodge?
That just happens to be where they have their lodge. Apparently, if I understood this correctly, because the bomb shelters are not always in use...
they try to, multi-purpose...
Yeah, they can make a little revenue off of it.
Got it.
So what that meant is this lodge had to... I guess they had to set everything up and then put everything away.
Things get stored in a closet or something.
Yeah. And in this lodge meeting, there were people of all faiths all three Abrahamic faiths. Right. And, all different backgrounds and from a bunch of different countries. I mean, this particular lodge holds their meeting in English. So we had no problem.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
So, I'm sure of, for example, Garibaldi Lodge in New York, which does everything in Italian.
Right, right. Yeah, lodges have their own local character, and there are places in international cities that will maybe cater to a diaspora group of folks in their local tongue, and sometimes local traditions that are slightly different from whatever the reigning one is, kind of nationally or whatever.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. Like if I was Pennsylvania is one particular. It's got its own
organizing group above it. Yeah.
So, for example, coming.
Oh yeah. There's a slight difference between that group and the group that governs kind of California.
Exactly. So coming to LA.
And we can all cross communicate and visit, but there's some slight differences in probably the ways that we greet each other. Like some of the modes of recognition. Right. How somebody is.
Yeah. And some of the. Yeah, there are other slight differences.
Things we won't get into. No. Nothing exciting. It'd be boring if we were telling you. It's just it's like inside baseball.
We can nerd out another time.
We can nerd out even more.
But it's nice that you can walk in there and you can walk into a lodge anywhere in the world, and there are instant ways that we can all be.
That somebody is legitimately a member, and they're not there to try to be a jerk, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you always feel welcomed, and you share a meal together. Yeah. So it was a very, very special experience.
That had to be amazing.
But it was so cool being there with people of all different backgrounds, and again of three different faiths.
And that's in Israel, because actually the only rule in most Western is. You can even be agnostic. You just can't be an atheist, like an actual atheist. And where that line is in some of the more progressive Masonic jurisdictions, it could be like you wouldn't believe. Like, you might think you're an atheist, like 99 other places in the world, but if you, could draw, again, I'm getting really into the nerdy details here, but especially in California, I mean, I have brothers who are witches and voodoo priests, and I mean, it's basically anything that's other than like a Satanist or a absolute atheist can be a Mason in the West. Yeah, and I've seen people sworn in on doesn't have to be a Bible; it can be a Quran, it can be Tanakh. Right. The other thing that has really influenced my travels, and I think of recently more so than Freemasonry, is about 3.5 years ago, I started training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And so before that, I'd always wanted to learn a martial art. And I was always afraid because, my hands, what if I hurt my hands? But now that I'm doing more and more programming, I thought, well, it's not the end of the world. You can operate the mouse with your elbow if you have to. Yeah. And also, part of it is that I realized, you know what? I see more benefits than the. You got to live your life, yeah. And I started off training Krav Maga, which is the I hesitate to call it. I guess I'll call it a martial art. We don't have to get into the nerdy. Yeah, but it's discussion. It's a defense. It's a self-defense system that is taught to the Israeli military. Right. And I was very interested in learning it and had a great time getting into it. It was a great intro. And then I started, I saw that there was a kind of a ground fighting class that was offered where I was training Krav Maga. Or actually it was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class. And I thought, let me try that out. And, I wrestled a little bit when I was younger, and I probably wouldn't be too bad at it. And so I took this class, and I couldn't believe it. This seemed like magic. And first of all, I'll just say I got destroyed in that class. No doubt. I'm sure it must have been a rude awakening. So I thought, oh my God, I have to learn this stuff. This is amazing. So I immediately went and I signed up for classes over at Vitor Shaolin's academy in Midtown Manhattan. And I started training, absolutely loved it. Had no idea at the time who Vitor Shaolin was and still is. I mean, it turns out he's an absolute legend in the sport. The name is familiar to me, and I'm not even into it, really. I listen to Joe Rogan or whatever. Yeah. It's like I get my secondhand knowledge from other people who are into it. I had no idea. Now I realize, I've traveled all around the world training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So when you travel, we talked about that. You're gonna. There was a moment where we might try to get together because I've never done it. Oh, right. I'm curious. Yeah, we got to get you in there. Yeah, we did. But that's on me. So we'll get you into the gym sometime. In fact, whenever I travel, I bring a belt. Sometimes I bring a gi. Yeah. When I was in Israel, I brought 2 gis, my belt, and my no gi stuff. And I was training over at a place called Team Burt in Tel Aviv. Okay. And had some great training there. Got my butt kicked. But you know what? They say in jiu-jitsu, you're either winning or you're learning. And okay. I like that. But, so there I did a lot of learning, but that's a great thing about it. It has this, like Freemasonry, it has this way of, it frees you of, any sense of ego. Yeah. Because it really isn't about, pretty fast. I mean, if you're competing, yes, it's about winning, but sure. But it's really just about being and experiencing and learning and evolving, not just as a martial artist, but as a human being. Mm-hmm. So, we never celebrate, if we're rolling or sparring in class and, if I choke someone out or if I get someone in an arm bar, I don't. You're not doing a victory dance. Yeah. Exactly. You're not doing the icky shuffle. Yeah. What's more important is. He's like, how old are you? You have to be over 40 to know that reference. Okay. But what's more important is that you thank your training partner because I can't exist without you and you can't exist without me. Right. And we help each other to grow as martial artists and as human beings. This is a very Taoist sort of yin-yang relationship here. And that's a special thing about it. So that's how I can go in and, get totally destroyed in a training session and still walk out of there being so incredibly happy and euphoric, and because it just doesn't really matter. And the beautiful thing about it is that we have this common language that we speak. So I can go anywhere in the world and train, and
it doesn't matter what language the class is taught in. I can get a sense for what's happening. I might not understand the finer points since the teacher's talking about, oh, you use your leverage here and you do this. Well, but I can see what's happening. I can learn enough that I can go and train it. And actually, when we do the sparring, we're speaking the same language, and I can just jump in fact, we had a guy training. Oh, it was at Shaolin's Academy recently, and I could sense that he wasn't really too comfortable with his English, and I heard the accent and I realized, he was Japanese. Okay. So, so we're training, and I know
you've been to Japan a bit. And you've had a knowledge. You probably know a little bit of Japanese.
Yeah. So we were, we wound up as drilling partners. Okay. So I was sensing and his name was a Japanese name. So I said, "Oh, Nihonjin desu ka?" And he's like, yeah. So we're doing the whole thing in Japanese. And he's like, "How do you know Japanese?" And so I mentioned, how I knew. And it turns out that he trains at Triforce in Tokyo, where I trained when I was there.
That's hilarious.
So he wasn't there that day that I happened to be training.
You trained at his place.
And I've trained at Triforce in Osaka as well. So we knew all the same people.
That's hilarious.
And so he came back a number of times and training at our gym. He was there in New York taking an English language class. And I was lucky in that I got a Japanese language class that day.
I was going to say, you got to practice, got to refresh your Japanese.
But it's so special that you can go anywhere. I mean, like different schools have different styles, and so if I go someplace else, like there's one particular move that I'm never able to execute when I'm training at Shaolin's, because everybody there knows that move. So I can't really I can never pull it off. So I was training at a school in Florida one time, and I walk in there and I figured, let me go and try that, let me try that guard pass. And I guess they all get taught a different guard pass. So was yours a surprise to them? And I guess, it just happened to work. And I thought, that works. It's pretty cool. Nice. But it's nice. At its best, to me, a really great sparring session feels like a conversation.
Okay. Interesting. Analogy.
It goes back and forth. And now actually one really cool thing is, so my girlfriend Bella, she trains MMA. Okay. And she trains at one of the Tiger Schulman schools.
Oh, yeah. No doubt.
So she's
one of the legends.
She does a lot more kickboxing, and she's also been doing grappling. So, I mean, the grappling she's learning is really geared toward MMA, but it's still the same system. And so we sometimes drill together, and we play around with leverage, and we explore. So it's, it's one nice thing that I'm able to share with my girlfriend, that we can choke each other and break each other's hands.
And some people have to pay retail for that.
Exactly.
So that brings us to our concluding chunk of this really fun, for me and hopefully for you, epic interview, which is you're here in China with a lovely Bella who's listening to her music over there across the room. Don't know if she's tracking us here in real time or not, but she'll certainly hear this. You're here to meet her dad and see her where she's from. So again, you've been to Shanghai, very different experience. Which I'm sure you know anyway. Yeah. But this is your first time in Beijing.
Yeah.
What's your take on Beijing? What's your your hot take? You're allowed. Give me your 36-hour take on Beijing.
Or 48. It's huge.
It is big.
And I live in New York.
It's just glad to see you.
Yeah. It's it's great. But one thing I've noticed, there's something about China that I'm really digging. Everybody seems very just open and friendly, and there's this kind of everybody has this very free spirit and this open communication. Like there's no walls or barriers. Well, there is a wall about 2 hours away, but
right. Yeah. You took a trip there yesterday to go check that wall out.
But, it's the way that everybody interacts. It reminds me a lot of New York.
Okay.
That, the walls are down. Everybody's just,
when it helps that you're with a Chinese person who's able to both help you just navigate and interpret, and also people assume you must be all right. You're not like wandering the streets by yourself. But I experienced that on my own too. And of course now I'm comfortable enough that I don't look like I don't act like a tourist in public because I know my way around. But so you're experiencing a sense of, you feel welcome, basically.
Oh, totally.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. I'm glad that still exists given the current political climate back home.
I haven't detected anything. I mean, granted, like, we're in the fancy hotel and everything. And but so far, everybody's been incredibly warm and friendly. And we've had some really great cross-cultural experiences. Yeah. And, the other day we were getting something at the concierge, and I think we forgot to pick up a SIM card before we got here. Yeah. So, we got one at the hotel. And, because Bella's WeChat account is based in
her U.S. number, yeah.
And it's actually linked to an account in China. So she can use the WePay thing. And
right.
So she held out her phone to pay for the SIM card. And so I pulled out my phone in front of the concierge and I pretended to be accepting money. I said, "Ching." So like the concierge just cracked up because
nice
for the non-Chinese speakers, and I can't even count myself as a Chinese speaker. I was basically saying, "Please."
right.
And so anyway, they thought that was hilarious.
Nice. Well, I love that you from traveling. What are you most anticipating about the rest of your trip here? I mean, of course, there's the personal stuff, but and in terms of cultural things, like what's your take? You've traveled to all these countries. Mm-hmm. What are you looking forward to kind of gleaning from the rest of your trip here in China?
Well, for me, the big highlight of travel isn't about seeing as many tourist locations as I can. I mean, I really wanted to see the Great Wall because it's just, one of seven wonders.
It's pretty great, yeah.
Yeah, so we had to go see that. And this morning we were thinking about going to see Tiananmen Square, maybe the Forbidden City, but we were both sort of on the fence about it. We just wanted to enjoy our time.
Right.
For me, the thing about travel, and especially international travel that I love, is about interacting with people. And I like experiencing the culture, not just learning about the culture, but really experiencing it and experiencing genuine human interactions with other people,
right.
Which is, I think, one of the things that really appeals to me about Freemasonry and especially about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because you take your, you get to the core of who you are as a person. It teaches you to rip away all the other layers and just show who you are and to experience other people as they are. And you learn how to be a more empathic person, how to interact in a much more sincere and open way with people. And that's what I'm looking forward to about being here, going and meeting Bella's father, going to the village where she grew up. I've only seen pictures and I've heard about it, and it sounds like such a magical and special place to be and to live and to grow up. And I can't wait to see it. And I can't wait to meet her father. And I'm going there knowing that I may be the very first Western person that a lot of people in her village have ever met. In a way that feels like a huge responsibility. And, but I'm just going to go with an open mind. And all I can do is just go there with a smile and be sincere and just let the interactions happen on their own. And I'm looking forward to, people being curious about who I am and me being curious about who they are and learning more about Bella. It's a great opportunity to grow closer and understand, where she came from. And also part of me is curious because this is a completely different life than I ever could have imagined. So I want to know. I was even asking her, I said, if someone is doing some farm work, could I go and help? I want to, I want to experience this. I want to know. It just seems amazing. I mean, just hearing, like last night we had dinner with two of her childhood friends, mm-hmm. and they were talking about walking past the apple orchards and just going and picking the apple and it just tasting like candy and, it completely different than what it tastes like today.
Sure.
And feeling this close connection with the seasons and with the earth and with the ground and with the food that you eat and how it didn't need any seasoning and all these kinds of, and it just sounds amazing. And so just to experience that, and people who have a completely different perspective, it's not just a matter of, some guy who grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, meeting his buddy who's originally from Atlanta at a lodge meeting in LA. We're like worlds apart, and to have it transcend language. And one thing I have learned through my travel is that it doesn't matter whether you speak the same language or not. If there's a desire to communicate, you can find a way to make it happen.
Jeff, I don't know a better way to end it than that. It means so much to me that you're sitting here. Really appreciate you, man.
Thank you very much. So great to see you again, and so great to have this chance to talk with you.
Thank you. Well, we're going to have you back on a side dish after your trip to get the follow-up to the story.
Possibly on the next visit to China.
Oh, even better. Thanks, man.
Great. Thank you.
All right, that's the show this week. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to find out more about Jeff Marder. You can find him and many of the things we talked about via the links in the show notes at crazyinagoodway.com. Also, don't forget to check out my new daily show called How China Works with Ying Li, as well as this week's episode of Big Fish Side Dish, where I bring back a returning champion for a very unstructured, free-flowing talk. You have Elliot Zagman. You're not going to want to miss this one. Thanks again, and I'll see you soon.